I'm still not where I want to be.
How much farther do you have?
I don't know.
Why are you
It's
not
a lifelong.
pleased?
There is no goal, I think.
One morning, Ben Napier walked into his daughter's room, bent down to pick her up like he'd done 1,000 times before, and his shoulder locked. He couldn't lift her. The man who built houses with his bare hands. The man millions of viewers trusted as the strongest guy on HGTV. Stood there helpless while his little girl stared up at him confused. That single moment started a chain of events that almost destroyed everything. Season 6 of Home Town was filming on schedule. The cameras were rolling. The crew was setting up for a kitchen reveal in downtown Laurel. And Ben Napier was doing what Ben Napier always did, carrying a solid oak countertop across a construction site like it weighed nothing. Except this time, something was different. If you watch that episode closely, you can actually see it. A small wince, a shift in his grip, a moment where he sets the wood down a few seconds faster than usual and rolls his right shoulder like something inside is grinding against bone. Nobody on set said anything. The crew moved on. The cameras kept rolling. But Ben knew, for months, a bone spur had been growing inside his right shoulder joint. Every time he lifted a hammer, every time he swung a sledge, every time he picked up his daughters after a long day of filming, that tiny piece of extra bone was digging deeper into his rotator cuff. Slowly, quietly, relentlessly. He didn't tell Erin at first. He didn't tell the producers. He didn't tell the millions of fans who watched him every Sunday night and thought he was the strongest man on television. He just kept building. But the human body doesn't care about TV schedules. And one morning, the pain became so sharp that Ben couldn't raise his arm above his chest. The man who had spent his entire adult life working with his hands was suddenly afraid to use them. What would you do if the one thing that defined your entire career was slowly being taken away from you? Would you push through the pain, or would you stop before the damage became permanent? Tell me what you think in the comments. Because what Ben chose to do next didn't just change his body. It changed the entire future of Home Town. And the real reason behind his decision is something most fans still don't know about. To understand why Ben Napier refused to stop working, you have to understand where he came from. Long before HGTV cameras ever rolled into Mississippi, Ben was just a big guy with a beard, a beat-up pickup truck, and an empty bank account. He grew up in North Carolina and Mississippi as the son of two preachers. Life was simple. Money was always tight. If something broke in a house, you did not call a repairman. You went out to the shed, found a wrench, and figured out how to fix it yourself. That was where Ben learned to love wood, metal, and hard work. In 2004, at Jones County Junior College, he met a petite girl with short blonde hair named Erin Napier. She was an art student. He was the president of the student government. Ben was 6'6" and weighed over 300 pounds. Erin was tiny, quiet, and creative. To everyone looking from the outside, they looked like an impossible match. He was a gentle giant. She was the artistic visionary. Within 6 days of meeting, they knew they were going to get married. They moved to Laurel, Mississippi. Back then, Laurel was not the charming tourist town people see on television today. The timber industry had collapsed decades earlier. Downtown storefronts were boarded up. Historic homes were rotting away under thick layers of humidity, neglect, and peeling paint. Young people were leaving town as fast as they could pack their bags. Ben and Erin stayed. Ben took a job as a youth minister at a local church, earning barely enough to pay the bills. On nights and weekends, he retreated to a dusty garage, building tables out of scrap what he salvaged from old barns. Erin worked as a graphic designer, making custom wedding invitations by hand. They bought an old 1925 Craftsman cottage that nobody else wanted and spent every extra dollar fixing it up room by room. They were not trying to become celebrities. They were just two broke 20-somethings trying to build a life. Then, one afternoon in 2014, an executive at HGTV named Lindsay Widehorn was scrolling through Instagram. She stopped on a photo of a small, warm living room with exposed wooden beams and vintage furniture. She clicked the profile. It belonged to Erin Napier. Lindsay sent a direct message. "Have you two ever thought about being on TV?" Erin thought it was a joke. Laurel was a town of 20,000 people in the middle of Mississippi. Why would anyone want to watch a show about regular people fixing up forgotten houses? in a place most Americans could not even find on a map. HGTV flew down a small crew to film a 30-minute pilot episode. Ben and Erin did not hire stylists. They did not practice fancy television lines. Ben showed up in his work boots, stained jeans, and a faded flannel shirt. Erin brought her handmade watercolor sketches. When that pilot aired in 2016, something unexpected happened. Over 1.2 million people tuned in. Viewers were tired of flashy real estate agents screaming about profit margins in million-dollar mansions. They wanted something real. They wanted sawdust, front porches, and two people who genuinely loved their town and each other. HGTV immediately ordered a full season. Almost overnight, the small-town woodworker was thrown into the blinding spotlight of national television. The orders poured in. The filming schedule grew brutal. Ben was suddenly working 16-hour days, lifting tons of lumber, tearing down walls, and running a growing business empire. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. The ratings were soaring. The town was booming. Ben and Erin had become the golden couple of American home renovation. The world saw the smiles, the charming southern drawl, and the beautiful reveals. What the cameras never captured was the invisible pressure building behind closed doors. Because as the checks got bigger, the stakes got higher. And just as Ben thought he had secured his family's future forever, a massive scandal broke across Mississippi that threatened to tear down everything he had spent 10 years building. In the summer of 2022, the state of Mississippi was rocked by the largest public corruption scandal in its history. State auditors uncovered that more than $77 million in federal welfare funds, money strictly intended to feed starving children, shelter homeless mothers, and support the poorest families in the most impoverished state in America, had vanished. Instead of buying food and medicine, the funds have been quietly diverted into private bank accounts, luxury horse ranches, million-dollar speeches that were never delivered, and a brand-new $5 million volleyball stadium at the University of Southern Mississippi. Dozens of high-profile political figures were dragged into court. Former NFL superstar quarterback Brett Favre became the national face of the outrage. Former Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant found his private text messages splashed across international news headlines. 47 individuals were named in civil lawsuits and criminal investigations. The entire state felt betrayed, furious, and heartbroken. Then came the document leak. Thousands of pages of private text messages, emails, and financial ledgers were unsealed and uploaded to public databases. Journalists, investigators, and internet sleuths began combing through every single line, searching for every name, every connection, and every hidden secret. And right in the middle of those files, one name suddenly appeared: Ben Napier. Within hours, the internet lit up like a wildfire. Social media feeds flooded with frantic posts. Comment sections turned toxic. Tabloid headlines screamed with shocking claims. Was a gentle giant Home Town secretly involved in a multi-million-dollar government fraud scheme? Was the folksy, church-going woodworker living a double life? For millions of loyal fans who viewed Ben as a symbol of pure honesty and small-town decency, it felt like a punch straight to the gut. The world of Home Town had always been an escape from the corruption and cynicism of modern life. Now, that safe haven seemed shattered. If you enjoy discovering the hidden stories behind the world's biggest names, subscribe now, because what the investigation actually uncovered behind closed doors is something most people never saw reported. Behind the scenes in Laurel, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Ben Napier was not a slick Hollywood celebrity with a team of high-powered crisis managers. He was a father of two young girls, a craftsman who had built his reputation board by board, nail by nail. A single public accusation, even a false one, could cancel the show, bankrupt his local retail stores, and destroy the community he had dedicated his life to reviving. Yet, as the media pressure grew louder by the day, Ben and Erin chose to do something completely counterintuitive. They said nothing. They did not release frantic public relations statements. They did not post tearful defensive videos online. They did not go on morning talk shows to clear their names. They simply remained quiet, showed up to work, and let the investigators do their jobs. And when federal authorities and forensic accountants finally completed their exhaustive review of the text records, the undeniable truth came to light. Ben Napier was completely innocent. His name had only surfaced because third-party political figures had mentioned him in passing while discussing regular, legitimate community events and tourism projects in the city of Laurel. Ben had never asked for welfare money. He had never received a single cent of the diverted state funds. He was never named among the 47 defendants. He was never questioned by federal prosecutors, and he had zero knowledge of the illegal schemes happening in the state capitol. It was a textbook case of guilt by association. A completely innocent man caught in the crossfire of someone else's greed simply because he was the most famous resident in his region. The storm slowly cleared. The truth won. Ben's reputation remained completely unbroken, and his fans rallied around him with even greater loyalty. He had survived the worst public test of his entire life. But just as Ben took a deep breath and stepped back on the construction set, believing the danger had passed, he felt a sudden, sharp, sickening pop deep inside his right shoulder. This time, the threat was not coming from politicians, reporters, or false rumors. This time, the threat was inside his own body, and it was about to force him into the most terrifying fight of his life. By early 2023, the pain was no longer something Ben Napier could hide behind a warm smile. Every morning started the exact same way. He would sit on the edge of his bed, take a deep breath, and mentally prepare himself just to put on his shirt. The simple act of sliding his right arm through his sleeve felt like grinding broken glass inside his joint. The bone spur had grown too large. It was tearing directly through his rotator cuff, chewing away at the surrounding cartilage with every movement. For years, Ben had built his entire identity on being the strong one. He was the 6'6" gentle giant who could lift heavy antique mantles by himself. He was a protector of his family. He was a dependable husband who never said no to a hard day of physical labor. Now, he could not even lift a coffee mug without a sharp wave of nausea-inducing pain shooting down his arm. The hardest part was not the construction work. The hardest part was coming home after 16 hours on set and seeing his two little girls, Helen and May, running toward him with open arms. They wanted their daddy to swing them through the air. They wanted him to carry them on his shoulders through the yard. Instead, Ben had to drop to his knees, brace his injured arm against his ribs, and hold him with only his left hand. That was the moment the emotional weight broke him. He was terrified that his best years as a father and a builder were slipping away before he turned 40. In March 2023, Ben walked into a hospital surgical unit. The procedure was extensive and risky. The surgeons had to cut deep into his right shoulder, shave down the jagged bone spur, trim away the decayed cartilage, and stitch the torn rotator cuff back to bone with surgical anchors. For a desk worker, a rotator cuff surgery is painful. For a professional woodworker whose entire living depends on upper body strength, it is a career-threatening gamble. If the tendon did not heal properly, or if scar tissue locked the joint forever, Ben would never swing a hammer again. Home Town, as millions knew it, would be over. When Ben woke up from the anesthesia, his entire upper body was strapped into a rigid medical sling. He could not move his fingers. He could not dress himself. He could not drive. The man who had spent a decade building homes for other people was suddenly completely dependent on his wife. Erin never flinched. She drove him to every appointment. She managed their production schedules. She ran their retail businesses. She took care of their two toddlers. And every single day, she stood next to Ben, reminding him that his worth was not measured by how much weight he could carry with his hands. Everyone faces moments in life when everything suddenly feels out of control. Maybe you have experienced a time where your body failed you, where an unexpected setback stopped your plans, or where you felt completely helpless. In those dark moments, you realize that true strength is not about never falling down. It is about having the courage to lean on the people who love you while you heal. The recovery was grueling. For weeks, Ben had to endure painful physical therapy sessions. He spent hours inside small rehabilitation rooms, sweating through tears just trying to lift a tiny 1-pound rubber ball a few inches into the air. Progress was painfully slow. There were days of bitter frustration where his arm simply refused to follow his brain's commands. On the set of Home Town, viewers began to notice a change. In new episodes, Ben was often seen sitting on wooden stools rather than climbing ladders. Erin and the construction crew handled the heavy lifting. The internet whispered once again, wondering if Ben was quietly stepping away from television. What the audience did not see was the relentless work happening when the cameras stopped recording. Month after month, Ben kept doing his exercises. He pushed through the scar tissue. He rebuilt his strength fiber by fiber, meal by meal, dropping significant body weight to take the pressure off his joints and improve his cardiovascular health. Then, 6 months after the operation, a quiet breakthrough happened in the backyard of their Laurel home. May reached her arms up. Ben paused, looked down, and reached out with his right arm. He lifted her straight up into the sunlight without a single trace of pain. The physical battle was finally won. Ben Napier was back. But as he stepped back into the world with renewed health and a completely fresh perspective on life, Ben and Erin made a massive decision. They were done playing it small. They were about to take the biggest gamble of their entire television career, a project so massive it would put an entire American city on their shoulders and prove once and for all what the Napier family was truly built to accomplish. When Ben Napier stood back on his feet with his shoulder fully healed, he was no longer the same man who had swung a sledgehammer on the first day of season 1. He was lighter on his feet. He had dropped over 60 pounds to protect his joints and heart. His eyes carried the wisdom of someone who had stared into the quiet fear of losing his livelihood and made it to the other side. He and Erin had built a television empire from a dusty garage in Mississippi. But now, their work took on an entirely deeper meaning. For Ben and Erin, houses had never been about granite countertops or modern open floor plans. Every home was a living, breathing vault of human memories. And nowhere was that truth more obvious than inside a little green craftsman cottage on the edge of Laurel. A few years earlier, in an unforgettable episode titled Family Values, Ben had poured his entire heart into renovating that home for his younger brother, Jesse, and his wife, Lauren. It was not just another job on the production schedule. It was a true labor of love. While Ben was handcrafting furniture in his woodshop and Erin was sketching custom retro wallpaper for the kitchen, both families received life-changing news at the exact same time. Jesse and Lauren were expecting their first baby. Just a few weeks later, Erin discovered she was pregnant with her and Ben's second daughter, May. The two cousins would grow up together, learning to walk on the very hardwood floors Ben had laid down with his own hands. For 4 years, that little green cottage became the beating heart of the extended Napier family. It was where they gathered for every Christmas morning. It was where Ben sat at the kitchen island early in the morning, sharing countless cups of hot coffee with his mother. It was where children took their first steps and laughter echoed through the hallways. Then, in early 2025, life moved forward again. Jesse and Lauren made the difficult decision to put the beloved house up for sale. Their growing family needed wide-open country land with woods for their children to explore and space for a large vegetable garden. For most people, selling a home is just a financial transaction. For Ben and Erin, it felt like giving away a piece of their own history. Erin shared a touching message with millions of followers online, admitting that she would not even be able to look at the house once it stood vacant, praying that another loving family would fill its rooms with warmth. Ben looked back on those 4 years with deep gratitude, honoring every single memory carved into those wooden walls. It was a bittersweet reminder that life moves fast, and nothing stays the same forever. What happened next proved that Ben and Erin were ready to take their mission far beyond the borders of Laurel. Instead of slowing down, they stepped directly into the most ambitious television project ever attempted on home renovation television. The producers of HGTV approached them with a challenge that seemed almost impossible. Could they take everything they had learned in Laurel, travel hundreds of miles away to Sebring, Florida, and rescue an entire American city from total collapse? Sebring was a community on the brink. Years of devastating hurricane winds, severe flooding, and sudden economic hardship had left the historic downtown core battered and bruised. Historic buildings sat abandoned with boarded windows. Small family businesses had closed their doors. The town spirit was hanging on by a thread. Ben Napier did not hesitate for a second. He packed his bags, assembled a massive team of HGTV and Food Network stars, and stepped onto the streets of Sebring not just as a carpenter, but as a leader with a clear vision. Over the course of filming Hometown Takeover, Ben led a staggering transformation. They did not simply slap fresh paint on old brick walls. They rebuilt the historic home of a beloved local kindergarten teacher who had dedicated her entire life to the town's children. They restored a historic downtown theater. They revitalized a struggling Cuban cafe and a classic family soda shop. They constructed a handcrafted community gazebo in Sebring Central Park, so neighbors would have a place to gather again. Through every long summer day in the Florida heat, Ben worked tirelessly alongside the local residents. He listened to their stories, respected their heritage, and gave them back their pride. He proved to the world that when you combine honest labor, genuine empathy, and community spirit, even the most broken places can rise again. By the time the cameras wrapped in Sebring, network executives realized something extraordinary. Ben and Erin Napier were no longer just home renovators. They had become the single most trusted, authentic, and beloved figures on lifestyle television anywhere in the world. While other celebrity couples were chasing Hollywood glamour, flashy scandals, and shallow trends, Ben and Erin stayed completely grounded in who they were. They remained the two kids from Jones County who believed that hard work, faith, and family were the only things that truly mattered. HGTV made a historic move. They locked Ben and Erin down with a massive multi-year contract, extending all the way through 2027, ordering 32 brand new episodes of Home Town. The network made it clear, Ben and Erin Napier are the heart and soul of the channel for years to come. One of the most touching milestones of their entire journey came when Ben and Erin returned to the campus of Jones College, the very place where two broke students had fallen in love 20 years earlier. Standing inside the old president's house, tearing down rotting plaster and rebuilding the historic structure with local timber, Ben looked around at the life he had built. He had started with nothing but an old toolbox and an open heart. So, what really happened to Ben Napier? He was not broken by a brutal shoulder injury that threatened to paralyze his career. He was not destroyed by a sensational political scandal that falsely dragged his name into headlines. And he was never corrupted by the bright lights and millions of dollars of television fame. Instead, Ben Napier took every blow life threw at him, stood his ground with quiet dignity, and proved that a man's true strength is measured by the homes he protects, the family he cherishes, and the community he lifts up when nobody else is watching. He remains what he has always been, the steady, smiling giant of Laurel, Mississippi, a man built to last. But this is not the only celebrity story where success came with a hidden cost and an unexpected personal battle. In our next documentary, we reveal the shocking journey of another beloved television icon who nearly lost their entire career behind the scenes before making one of the greatest comebacks in entertainment history.